Well, the Jimmy Butler situation has taken yet another turn here. Wes Goldberg here from Locked On Heat. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Hit that follow button on your favorite podcast app. We've been covering this Jimmy Butler story nonstop. We've got two different podcasts that went up today. One immediately reacting after the Thursday night press conference where Jimmy Butler said that he wasn't happy and then issued a trade request to the team. We did a 1 hour long live special on Friday afternoon, me and my co-host David Ramil answering a bunch of questions and getting into even more of the fallout of all of this stuff. And now we have the latest turn in this saga. The Miami Heat have suspended Jimmy Butler for 7 games for multiple instances of conduct detrimental to the team over the course of the season, and particularly the last several weeks, according to their statement that was put out Friday night. They continue to say, through his actions and statements, he has shown he no longer wants to be part of this team. Jimmy Butler and his representative have indicated that they wish to be traded. Therefore, we will listen to offers. I'll get to this trade part of this in a second, but first, the suspension. Why the suspension? Now, the Heat had a few different options. They didn't have to suspend Jimmy Butler. They could have went to the NBA front office and asked for basically a rare and special clause that would allow them to send Jimmy Butler away from the team without suspending him, so that Jimmy Butler could still get paid, but that he could be away from the team. You can't just shut a player down. You can't do that. That under the Players Association and the rules, the player participation policy from the NBA, specifically as it in regards to star players, you can't just sit them, right? Like, these games still have to be played, and fans pay tickets to watch star players play. And so if you're going to send a player away, usually there's penalties that come along with that. If a star player isn't going to play in a game, technically they have to be suspended. And so that's what the Heat did here. Now, like I said, they could have applied to the NBA front office and said, hey, we want this special clause. There is a clause within that player participation policy that would have allowed them to send Jimmy Butler away without doing an entire suspension, because now that Jimmy's suspended, he could take this to the Players Association, file a grievance. Those grievances can last up to a year where he tries to recoup his money. He's going to lose about $2.4 million because of the suspension. So the Heat decided not to go in that direction and just say, you know what, we're going to outright suspend this guy, which they do have the ability to do, right? Conduct detrimental to the team, specifically over the last few weeks. What are the Miami Heat talking about? They're talking about leaking statements or leaking information to reporters about him wanting a trade. The December 25th, the Christmas Day report that he would prefer to get traded from the Miami Heat before the NBA trade deadline. And then obviously on Thursday night, the breaking point where he came out in that media session and said that he can no longer find joy on the court in Miami, and that it basically insinuating that he'd rather play elsewhere. And then within hours of the game ending, telling the Heat's front office that he wanted to be traded to any of the other 29 teams, that he'd prefer to play for any of the other 29 teams other than Miami. So that's how we got here. And we have here a struggle between two alphas, Jimmy Butler and Pat Riley. And this entire saga, dating back to when Pat Riley in his end of season press conference called out Jimmy Butler for not being available in games, challenged him to be more available, told him to keep his mouth shut when he was talking about the playoffs, using that kind of fiery language. But all of that stuff is one thing, but not negotiating a contract extension with Jimmy Butler. It comes down to the money here. And Jimmy Butler wants his money, and that's an understandable position to have. His ego has also been hurt here. There is something that comes along with being a max level player in the NBA. There's an ego associated with a status associated when you're the max guy, right? It is literally the most amount of money you're allowed to make. There's a salary cap slot built in for specific players. These are the top players in the NBA. Jimmy Butler has been a max player. He may no longer be a max player. And Pat Riley told him as much when he said, hey, we're not going to pay you $500,000 a game during the regular season for you to pick and choose your spots. And Jimmy Butler basically wanted to sandbag regular seasons, be ready for the playoffs, and potentially uncork playoff Jimmy at that point. But as we saw in this last year, One injury, and that goes away. And I think it bothered Pat Riley and it bothered this front office that because Jimmy Butler essentially coasted through the regular season last year, they were in the play-in tournament where Jimmy Butler got injured and wasn't available in the playoffs. And they didn't want to play the Boston Celtics in the first round. Nobody wants to, whatever you think about what the Miami Heat may have done in 2023 in that finals run, nobody wants to be in the play-in tournament. Everybody would prefer to be a top seed in the playoffs, make everything easier. That's why you play the regular season. And the Heat were sick of it. The Heat were sick of it. And they weren't going to reward Jimmy Butler with a max contract, especially as he goes into his age 35 season, especially a contract that would pay him, max level money, $50-60 million when he's 37 years old, a couple of years from now. And they were right to do that. And Jimmy Butler was right to ask for the most money. And that's why you have this struggle. You have what amounts to a tug of war. I've likened it to a poker game where Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler are just playing their hands, playing a new card, pushing their chips further into the pile, into the middle of the table, and calling each other's bluff over and over and over again. And like I said, it started with Riley's statement. And then Jimmy Butler responded by saying, you know what? I'll play this card. I'm going to opt in. I'm not going to push for the contract extension. In fact, I'm going to opt out after this season and test free agency, thinking that might get the Heat to budge. And it didn't. Okay. Jimmy Butler shows up to media day. A little late to media day. Still not sure we have the whole story on that. But he said no shenanigans, no emo Jimmy, no costume, nothing to his hair, nothing like that. Said no shenanigans. I'm just going to play out the season. Started the season playing that way. Played every preseason game except for the one where everybody sat. Played most every game during the regular season. Played on the second nights of back-to-backs, even when he probably should not have. And the Heat go on a 4-game win streak. And then he posts a triple-double in a loss to the Detroit Pistons. One of the best regular season games he's ever played in a Heat uniform, by the way. And then he comes out against Oklahoma City a couple nights after that, turns his ankle in the first few minutes of the game, exits in the first quarter, does not return, ruled out with a stomach illness, strangely enough, and then doesn't come back to the team for 5 games until they return home to play the Pelicans on Wednesday night. And he's away from the team for 13 days. While all of that was happening, it was being leaked that Jimmy Butler would like to play in Brooklyn, or that he would be open to being playing for Golden State, Dallas, Houston, Phoenix. It was also reported that the Heat were listening to trade offers for Jimmy Butler, which is also not surprising. Right around the 20-game mark, when they were still floating and being around a 500 team, other front offices got the impression that, hey, you know what? Maybe Jimmy Butler is not untouchable the way that he used to be untouchable. Okay? I think that also rubbed Jimmy Butler the wrong way. The fact that he was in trade rumors when maybe he wasn't ready to be in trade rumors. And then he plays another hand and says, okay, you want me in trade rumors? Here are the teams that I'd be open to playing for: Dallas, Houston, Golden State, and Phoenix. The Heat don't budge. The Heat, Jimmy Butler says, it's reported by Shams on ESPN on Christmas that Jimmy Butler would actually prefer to get traded. Not that he's just open to getting traded, but that he'd prefer to get traded before the trade deadline in February. The Heat respond by saying this is too much of a distraction. Pat Riley comes out with that statement and says, we are not trading Jimmy Butler. That's Pat Riley's card. Calls Jimmy's bluff. Well, Jimmy Butler then called Pat Riley's bluff, basically no-showed against the Pelicans and the Pacers, and he could say that he was out there trying. He wasn't trying. 18 points in 2 games combined. That's not trying. Six assists, 6 rebounds combined. No offensive rebounds. That's not trying. Comes into the press conference on Thursday. I was there. Says, I can't find joy in Miami anymore on the court. Suggests time after time that maybe he could find joy somewhere else. And within hours, the trade request is in. And then the Heat. And so that's Jimmy Butler calling Pat Riley's bluff. You're not going to trade me? Watch this. You don't think I'll make a stink because you think it's in my best interest to play well, get us to the playoffs, and deal with this in the summer? Jimmy Butler doesn't care about that. He's going to try to get his way. These are 2 alphas going at it. And sometimes rationale, logic, what's actually best, I think both sides have made pretty dramatic mistakes in this entire thing, from Pat Riley calling him out publicly to the way Jimmy Butler has handled this within the last week. So then, like I said, there was a situation here where Jimmy Butler, in that report asking for a trade, also said, you know what? But I'll be a good soldier. I'll play the Heat games. I'll do the basketball activities. And now, what that probably looks like is a lot like Wednesday and Thursday night, where he's just sort of going through the motions and he's not engaged. And it was just awkward. It was an awkward situation for everybody involved. And so Miami says, all right, we don't want that. We want what's best for the Heat right now is that you're away from the team. And so they suspend him for 7 games. And that 7 games, it doesn't matter. It technically takes Miami through the Saturday home game against the Jazz in their 6-game trip on the West Coast. The next game that Jimmy Butler could technically play, December 17th against the Denver Nuggets, he's not playing in that game. We all know that. This is over. This is over. The Heat have suspended Jimmy Butler. That is their card that they played. Does Jimmy Butler have another card to play? I don't know. I don't know that he needs to. He may have already gotten his way. The $2.4 million that he's going to lose potentially with the suspension, he could file a grievance, try to get that back in the next few months. Maybe he does that. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I don't know how much of a card that necessarily is or how much that money necessarily matters to him right now, because what really matters is the future money. What is he going to be making next year, the year after that, and the year after that? And the Heat never gave him assurances of what that was going to be. And Jimmy Butler wanted assurance of what that was going to be. And this is the best thing for the Heat. I know some people will say it's a bad look to suspend Jimmy Butler. We could debate how they got here. Like I said, both sides made mistakes. But all you can do when you're making decisions is deal with the facts in front of you and deal with the situation that is in front of you. You can't deal with what should have been, what could have been. You have to try to use the new data points to make a better decision going forward. And this was the best thing that he could do. They didn't want to take this to the NBA office, where maybe that could have been an option for them. Maybe they got some sort of indication that that wasn't going to be an option for them. Whatever the reason is, there's a trump card. They played another card here. The Heat are not going to be bullied. They do not want to be perceived as being bullied, more importantly than anything. And you hear this all the time from people in NBA circles. The Heat, Pat Riley, will not be bullied. And so if this 7-game suspension is sort of their last laugh at Jimmy Butler, and Jimmy Butler still gets what he wants and gets traded and finds a long-term contract somewhere else, then you could argue Jimmy Butler won, right? He got what he wanted. The Heat never wanted to trade Jimmy Butler in the regular season. They wanted to deal with this over the summer. If they trade Jimmy Butler will have won. In some weird way, he would have won. But like I said, the Heat have to do now what's best for them now, not what they wanted to do in August or September or October. And the situation had gotten so tense and so awkward, and a wedge so tangible in that locker room. I'm telling you, being in that locker room on Thursday night, you could feel it. It wasn't fair to Bam Adebayo. It's not fair to Tyler Hero. It's not fair to Eric Spoelstra. It's not fair to the people in that locker room for them to have to play and answer questions about this Jimmy Butler situation until while it's unresolved. And so you suspend him and you keep him away from the team. I still think that there might have been a better way to handle this, even the suspension. Like I said, go to the front office, the NBA front office, try to deal with it with the special clause that way. The Heat obviously decided they didn't want to do that. And the other part of this statement now, 8 days after Pat Riley says, we are not going to trade Jimmy Butler, says in the statement, quote, we will listen to offers. So now what? Who can actually offer a package for Jimmy Butler? And what does that package look like? What can the Heat realistically expect? The window for maximizing Jimmy Butler's trade value is gone. Again, deal with what's in front of you, not with what could have or should have been. The Heat could have gotten a lot more from Jimmy Butler in the summer. The Golden State Warriors called. The New York Knicks called, reportedly. They could have gotten a lot more from Jimmy Butler in the summer. And I'm not trying to tell you that they should have or not. I think it's out there kind of where I stood. I thought the window was closed. I think they should have engaged in those trade talks more seriously. Reportedly, they shut down those trade talks at every turn. They didn't want to deal with that. I think they should have entertained those offers. At the very least, entertain the offers. I thought it was malpractice that they didn't at least entertain the offers. but they didn't. Okay. They were open to trade offers in December. As a middling 500-ish team, I think other front offices said, I wonder if Jimmy Butler is available now. They were listening to offers, didn't pull the trigger on anything. I wouldn't be surprised if those offers that were there 2 and 3 weeks ago, when they were first listening to trade offers, aren't there anymore. Because they've lost leverage and they're losing time. And other NBA front offices know that. And Miami's negotiating now from a bit more of a weaker position than they would have been in the summer, or they would have been even in early December. But you can't help that. That's a sunk cost. That's a sunk cost. You've got to do right by the organization. And I'm not saying you have to trade Jimmy Butler for anything, right? You can't take Bradley Beal back, right? Then you're just in a worse, you're what you are now, but worse, because Bradley Beal is not as good as Jimmy Butler, and he's making more money than Jimmy Butler. He's under contract for 2 more years after this one, and he's got a no trade clause. It ties up your books. You're just a worse version of what you are now. Doesn't help your team. Can't do it. Can't do it. Now, can you get a third team involved and they take Bradley Beal, and then that third team sends other stuff that Miami might want? Maybe. But this is the point where Pat Riley has to go from listening to offers to leaning forward in his chair and engaging in trade talks. And again, in that statement, he says, we will listen to offers. This might be, again, just trying to create leverage. If all they're doing is trying to create leverage by saying we're listening to offers, fine. And that's probably what this is. But they better be doing more than listening if they actually want to get the best package possible for Jimmy. You've got to be engaged in that trade market. You've got to help grease the wheels on 3-team deals and on 4-team deals, because in this new apron world, it is really hard for these teams to do 1-for-1 trades. A lot of other teams have to be involved. And so I think Pat Riley and Andy Ellsberg, who have great relationships across NBA front offices, they need to be involved in this, in trying to manufacture something and put a framework of a deal together. So they've got to do that. Whether or not it's Phoenix or whatever. Golden State, would they trade for Jimmy Butler? They've been in a slide. The Dennis Schroeder deal is not working out for them. They could be desperate enough. Andrew Wiggins, Jonathan Kuminga, Moses Moody, Brandon Podziemski, a first-round pick, something like that. You get expiring salary like Kevon Looney, Gary Payton II, something like that might be the best Miami can do. Even if they didn't like that trade 3 weeks from now, if anything close to that trade offer is still on the table now, they might have to take it. They might have to take it. Dallas, I can't figure out a deal that works for them. Houston, perhaps. But what are they going to give up? And do they really want Jimmy Butler at 35 years old? I don't know. Ime Udoka, it seems like he could be a Jimmy Butler guy. They have a good relationship. That team's young. I don't know that Jimmy Butler fits their timeline. I don't know that they want to make that swing. But if it's, hey, here's Fred VanVleet, who has a team option, that's it. If you're the Heat, do you consider it? Because what Jimmy can do is still opt in, and we do this all over again next year and apply even more pressure because he doesn't want to turn down $52 million in an offseason when nobody other than Brooklyn has cap space. And I'll believe that Jimmy Butler turns down $52 million when I see it. So if Houston is offering Fred VanVleet, who's on a team option, and if you're the Heat, you could say, well, at least we don't have the uncertainty of whether or not Jimmy's going to opt in or not. With Fred VanVleet, we control the option. We can let him go, and now we get all that cap space. If your plan was to let Jimmy Butler walk away for nothing, that's better. That's a good deal. Again, if your plan was, we're not trading Jimmy for anything, we don't want anything back for him, we'd rather just have all of the flexibility that comes with him walking away, maybe that's there. Other teams, Denver, Memphis, all these other teams that have sort of been mentioned, New Orleans, call them. Jimmy just said he'll play for any of the other 29 teams. Now, whether or not that those teams can negotiate a contract extension with him or not, or if they want to, that's a different story, and that's for them to decide. But call him. What can you get with? Is there anything with Sacramento and De'Aaron Fox? It's worth a phone call. I don't think so. Probably not. I'm not sure Jimmy Butler fits what Sacramento would want to do in a post-De'Aaron Fox world, but call him. Call him. Who knows? But the Miami Heat have suspended Jimmy Butler for 7 games. They have told the world 8 days after Pat Riley said, we are not trading Jimmy Butler. They have done the 180, and they have said, we are open to listening to offers for Jimmy Butler. That's one turn. We're not done yet. Tune into Locked On Heat, wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. We will be back whenever we have an update.